Before we dive in, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories. Pablo Escobar was born in a small town in Colombia, but he wasn't made for small things. From the beginning, he wanted more. As a boy, he learned quickly that the world didn't care about good intentions. If you wanted something, you took it. Escobar wasn't just raised in poverty, he was taught to rise above it, by any means necessary. At first, it wasn't drugs. It was simple schemes, stealing cars, selling fake diplomas. But he was always clever, too clever. It wasn't long before he realized that the real money was in cocaine, a product that was taking over the world's underbelly. The rise of the Medellín Cartel wasn't an accident. It was Escobar's cold, calculated ambition, a vision that took over every part of his life. But with power comes fear. And that's where things got interesting. Escobar, the man who ruled a billion-dollar empire, feared one thing above all else: sleep. Pablo Escobar's empire was built on the principle that fear was a tool, not something to be afraid of. He controlled people with threats, intimidation, and violence, making his name synonymous with terror. But there was one fear he couldn't conquer: his own mind. Every night, as the world slept, Escobar couldn't. The man who killed without hesitation couldn't rest his head on a pillow without the weight of his actions haunting him. His empire, with all its wealth and power, became a prison of his own making. The luxury homes, the private jets, the fleets of cars, they meant nothing when the darkness closed in. Escobar had built a fortress around himself, but the more power he gained, the more paranoid he became. The fear that someone, somewhere, would come for him gnawed at his soul. His enemies weren't just other drug lords or the law. His true enemy was the silence of the night, where every creak of a floorboard, every whisper of wind through the window, felt like the sound of his own undoing. He couldn't escape it, no matter how far he ran. Pablo Escobar didn't build his empire overnight. It started with small deals, modest transactions that grew into something bigger, something untouchable. The Medellín Cartel was the lifeblood of Colombia's cocaine trade, and Escobar was the heart of it. He had a knack for logistics, for understanding how to move product, how to get it past borders and into the hands of those who wanted it most. He wasn't just a drug dealer, he was a businessman. He made connections in every level of society: politicians, law enforcement, judges. No one was out of reach. His charm was a weapon as deadly as his ruthlessness. He'd built a reputation as the Robin Hood of Colombia, throwing money at the poor, buying loyalty in exchange for power. But his generosity wasn't out of kindness, it was a methodical, strategic move. He knew that with loyalty came protection, and with protection came control. As his power grew, so did the fear. Escobar wasn't just feared by the poor, he had the Colombian government in his pocket. Yet, despite all his success, his mind kept racing. Every whisper of opposition, every glance in his direction, felt like the beginning of his downfall. By the mid-1980s, Escobar wasn't just the king of Colombia, he was a shadow that loomed over the entire world. His cocaine empire spanned the globe, and with every plane load of product that landed in the United States, his wealth multiplied. But wealth brought more than luxury, it brought enemies. Escobar's control of the Medellín Cartel was absolute. He held the reins tight, using terror as his signature. Assassinations became common, not just in Colombia, but in far-off cities like Miami and New York. He didn't hesitate to eliminate anyone who posed a threat, from rival traffickers to those who simply got in his way. With a personal army of loyal hitmen, Escobar was untouchable. Yet the more powerful he became, the more trapped he felt. His every move was watched. And the deeper he sank into his empire, the more restless his nights became. He was constantly on the run, moving between luxurious hideouts, always one step ahead of the law. But no matter how many safe houses he had, no matter how much wealth he amassed, the fear of someone catching up to him, of losing everything, never left him. Escobar's paranoia began to consume him, his nights filled with sleepless dread. The cracks in Escobar's empire started appearing when he underestimated the power of the state. He had always been a master of controlling the streets, but the government was beginning to fight back. As Colombia's drug war escalated, so did Escobar's need to control everything. He played chess with entire countries, but soon, the game had changed. His enemies, both within the cartel and outside, were closing in. Law enforcement, the military, and even rival traffickers smelled blood. Escobar, who had once been the untouchable king, now found himself fighting a battle on all fronts. The government in Colombia, pushed by the United States in its anti-drug efforts, started attacking Escobar's heart, his operations, his supply lines, his people. For the first time, the walls began to close in. The Colombian military set their sights on him, and Escobar knew they wouldn't stop until they had him. The fear he had long buried resurfaced, not as a shadow, but as an open terror. His once unshakable confidence now wavered. His empire, which had grown from his blood and sweat, was crumbling. And with it, his mind cracked as well. The sleepless nights grew longer, the paranoia more intense. Escobar's empire wasn't brought down by a single bullet or a single betrayal, it crumbled from within. The once impenetrable fortress he had built was now filled with enemies, some he never saw coming. People who once swore loyalty to him now whispered behind his back, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The government had begun its offensive in earnest. The Colombian military, equipped with American resources and backed by special forces, tracked Escobar relentlessly. They were no longer just chasing rumors, they had a map, a plan. The king of cocaine, once able to vanish into thin air, was being cornered. Escobar's paranoia reached its peak. He began making mistakes. He trusted too easily, and even those closest to him began to question his leadership. The walls of his empire were no longer made of wealth and fear, but of desperation and doubt. Every sound in the night felt like a threat, every shadow a potential assassin. Escobar, the man who had once controlled thousands, was now alone, trying to outrun his own demons. The final blow came not from a rival gang or a government agent, but from his own inability to sleep, to rest, to step back and look at the wreckage of his life. When Pablo Escobar died, the world didn't mourn the loss of a man, but the end of an era. His death was violent, fitting for a man whose life had been defined by violence. But even in death, Escobar left behind something far more lasting than his wealth or his terror. He left behind a legacy of contradictions. To some, Escobar was a villain, an embodiment of greed and ruthlessness. He built an empire on death, manipulation, and fear. His actions resulted in the deaths of thousands, many of whom were innocent. His cartel didn't just ruin lives, it destroyed entire communities, leaving a trail of shattered families and lost futures. But to others, he was a hero. The people he had helped with his generosity, the money he'd thrown around to build schools and parks, had seen him as their savior. For many, Escobar was the answer to their struggles, the man who offered them a way out of poverty, even if it came with blood on his hands. Escobar's story, his rise and fall, isn't just about crime. It's about the allure of power, the human desire to be seen, to dominate, to never feel weak. It's a warning about what happens when fear, paranoia, and ambition twist a person into something unrecognizable. Pablo Escobar's story is a haunting reminder of the price of power, and the toll it takes on the human soul. Escobar started as a boy with nothing, with dreams that seemed impossible. He wanted to rise, to matter, to be someone no one could ignore. But somewhere along the way, the line between ambition and obsession blurred. The man who built an empire became the prisoner of his own fear. Power can be intoxicating. Escobar ruled like a king, but he never truly controlled the empire he created. The more he accumulated, wealth, influence, territory, the less he was able to enjoy it. The paranoia that came with his position made him second-guess every decision, mistrust every ally, and question every person he encountered. The life he had built became a constant battle between what he had earned and what he feared losing. His downfall wasn't just the result of rival cartels or law enforcement, it was the result of his inability to escape the very thing he had sought to avoid: vulnerability. No amount of money, no fortress of bodyguards or palatial estates could protect him from the price of the life he had chosen. Escobar's empire collapsed not just because of external forces, but because of the internal collapse of his own psyche. Escobar's rise and fall serve as a stark warning about the dangers of unchecked ambition. His empire wasn't just built on cocaine, it was built on people. The destruction he left in his wake wasn't just economic, it was personal. Families lost loved ones to the violence he spread, communities were torn apart, and entire generations were left to pick up the pieces. The most tragic part of his story, however, wasn't the wealth he amassed or the power he wielded. It was the toll it took on his own humanity. Escobar's life became a cycle of fear, paranoia, and betrayal. What he failed to understand was that, in trying to outrun his fears and build something unbreakable, he only created a prison for himself. In the end, Escobar had everything a man could want: money, influence, control, but nothing to fill the emptiness that came with it. The very empire he built to shield himself became the chains that bound him. His inability to rest, to trust, to stop fighting for more left him isolated, even as he surrounded himself with people. Escobar's story teaches us that power, when it's driven by fear and greed, comes at a cost that's far more devastating than anything it can offer. Pablo Escobar's story is one of the most compelling, tragic, and cautionary tales of power and its consequences. His life was a whirlwind of rise, dominance, and eventual destruction. But at the heart of his empire was something more human than we often realize: his desperate desire to escape the fear that had haunted him since childhood. Escobar's empire fell not just because of external threats, but because the very things that made him strong, his ambition, his ruthlessness, his obsession with control, ultimately became his downfall. He sought power, but in doing so, he sacrificed his peace of mind. He sought security, but in the end, he was always looking over his shoulder, never able to fully relax, never able to sleep. What Escobar's story teaches us is that the pursuit of power, when it's driven by fear and the desire to control everything, leads to emptiness. True power isn't about wealth or fear, it's about balance, between ambition and humility, between strength and vulnerability. Escobar had it all, but he lost himself along the way. His story is a reminder that while ambition can take us far, it's what we choose to value along the journey, and how we deal with the fear that comes with power, that shapes who we truly become. Don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more gangster stories like this one.